Chapter 9. 700 miles to the northwest, in the cafeteria at Gateway Film Laboratory of St. Louis, Frances Dollarhide was waiting for a hamburger. The entrees offered in the steam table were filmed over. He stood beside the cash register and sipped coffee from a paper cup. A red-haired young woman wearing a laboratory smock came into the cafeteria and studied the candy machine. She looked at Frances Dollarhide's back several times and pursed her lips. Finally, she walked over to him and said, "Mr. D?" Dollarhide turned. He always wore red goggles outside the darkroom. She kept her eyes on the nosepiece of the goggles. "Will you sit down with me a minute? I want to tell you something." "What can you tell me, Eileen?" "That I'm really sorry. Bob was just really drunk and, clowning around. He didn't mean anything. Please come sit down, just for a minute. Will you do that?" "Mm-hmm." Dollarhide never said yes, as he had trouble with the sibilant. They sat. She twisted a napkin in her hands. "Everybody was having a good time at the party, and we were glad you came by," she said. "Real glad and surprised, too. You know how Bob is. He does voices all the time. He ought to be on the radio. He did, too, in 3 accents, telling jokes and all. He can talk just like a Negro. When he did that other voice, he didn't mean to make you feel bad. He was too drunk to know who was there." They were all laughing, then they didn't laugh. Dollarhide never said stopped because of the fricative S. That's when Bob realized what he'd done. He went on, though. "I know it," she said, managing to look up from her napkin to his goggles without lingering in the way. "I got on his case too about it, too. He said he didn't mean anything. He just saw he was into it, tried to keep up the joke. You saw how red his face got. He invited me to form a duet with him. He hugged you and tried to put his arm around you. He wanted you to laugh it off, Mr. D." "I've laughed it off, Eileen." "Bob feels terrible." "Well, I don't want him to feel terrible. I don't want that. Tell him for me. I won't make it any different here at the plant. Golly, if I had talent like Bob, I'd make a joke all the time." Dollarhide avoided plurals whenever he could. "Well, I'll get together before long, and he'll know how I feel." "Good, Mr. D. He's really under all the fun. He's a sensitive guy." "I'll bet. Tender, I imagine." Dollarhide's voice was muffled by his hand. When seated, he always pressed the knuckle of his forefinger under his nose. "Pardon?" "I think you're good for him, Eileen." "I think so, too. I really do. He's not drinking, but on weekends, he just starts to relax, and his wife calls the house. He makes faces while I talk to her, but I can tell he's upset after. A woman knows." She tapped Dollarhide on the wrist and, despite the goggles, saw the touch register in his eyes. "Take it easy, Mr. D. I'm glad we had this talk." "I am too, Eileen." Dollarhide watched her walk away. She had a suck mark on the back of her knee. He thought correctly that Eileen did not appreciate him. No one did, actually. In the great dark room was cool and smelled of chemicals. Frances Dollarhide checked the developer he had in an A tank. Hundreds of feet of home movie film from all over the country moved through the tank hourly. Temperature and freshness of the chemicals were critical. This was his responsibility, along with all the other operations, until the film had passed through the dryer. Many times a day he lifted samples of film from the tank and checked them frame by frame. The darkroom was quiet. Dollarhide discouraged chatter among his assistants and communicated with them largely in gestures. When the evening shift ended, he remained alone in the dark to develop, dry, and splice some film of his own. Dollarhide got home around 10 p.m. He lived alone in a big house his grandparents had left him. It stood at the end of a gravel drive that runs through an apple orchard north of St. Charles, Missouri, across the Missouri River from St. Louis. The orchard's absentee owner did not take care of it. Dead and twisted trees stood among the green ones. Now, in late July, the smell of rotting apples hung over the orchard. There were many bees in the daytime. The nearest neighbor was a half-mile away. Dollarhide always made an inspection tour of the house as soon as he got home. There had been an abortive burglary attempt some years before. He flicked on the lights in each room and looked around. A visitor would not think he lived alone. His grandparents' clothes still hung in the closets. His grandmother's brushes were still in her dresser with the combings of her hair in them. Her teeth were in a glass on the bedside table. The water had long since evaporated. His grandmother had been dead for 10 years. The funeral director asked him, "Mr. Dolarhyde, would you like to bring me your grandmother's teeth?" He replied, "Just drop the lid." Satisfied that he was alone in the house, Dolarhyde went upstairs, took a long shower, and washed his hair. He put on a kimono of a synthetic material that felt like silk and lay down on his narrow bed in the room he had occupied since childhood. His grandmother's hair dryer had a plastic cap and hose. He put on the cap and, while he dried, he thumbed through a new high-fashion magazine. The hatred and brutishness in some of the photographs were remarkable. He began to feel excited. He swiveled the metal shade of his reading lamp to light a print on the wall at the foot of the bed. It was William Blake's The Great Red Dragon and the Woman Clothed with the Sun. The picture had stunned him the first time he saw it. Never before had he seen anything that approached this graphic thought. He felt that Blake must have peeked in his ear and seen the red dragon. For weeks, Dolarhyde had worried that his thoughts might glow out his ears, might be visible in the darkroom, might fog the film. He put cotton balls in his ears. Then, fearing that cotton was too flammable, he tried steel wool. That made his ears bleed. Finally, he cut small pieces of asbestos cloth from an ironing board cover and rolled them into little pills that would fit in his ears. The red dragon was all he had for a long time. It was not all he had now. He felt the beginnings of an erection. He had wanted to go through this slowly, but now he could not wait. Dolarhyde had closed the heavy draperies over the windows in the downstairs parlor. He set up his screen and projector. His grandfather had put a lazy-boy recliner in the parlor over his grandmother's objections. She had put a doily on the headrest. Now Dolarhyde was glad. It was very comfortable. He draped a towel over the arm of the chair. He turned out the lamps, lying back in the dark room. He might have been anywhere. Over the ceiling fixture, he had a good light machine which rotated, making varicolored dots of light crawl over the walls, the floor, his skin. He might have been reclining on the acceleration couch of a space vehicle, and a glass bubbled out among the stars. When he closed his eyes, he thought he could feel the points of the light move over him, and when he opened them, those might be the lights of cities above or beneath him. There was no more up or down. The light machine turned faster as it got warm, and the dots swarmed over him, flowed over furniture in angular streams, fell in meteor showers down the walls. It might have been a comet plunging through the Crab Nebula. There was one place shielded from the light. He had placed a piece of cardboard near the machine. It cast a shadow over the movie screen. Sometimes in the future, he would smoke to heighten the effect, but he did not need it now, this time. He thumbed the drop switch at his side to start the projector. A white rectangle sprang on the screen, grayed and streaked as the leader moved past the lens, and then the gray Scotty perked up its ears and ran to the kitchen door, shivering and wagging its stump of a tail. A cut to the Scotty running beside the curb, turning to snap at its side as he ran. Now Mrs. Leeds came into the kitchen carrying groceries. She laughed and touched her hair. The children came in behind her. A cut to a badly lit shot in the Dolarhyde's own bedroom upstairs. He's standing nude before the print of the Great Red Dragon and the Woman Clothed with the Sun. He's wearing combat glasses, the close fitting wrapping around plastic glasses favored by hockey players. He has an erection, which he improves with his hand. The focus blurs as he approaches the camera with stylized movements, hands reaching to change the focus as his face fills the frame. The picture quivers and sharpens suddenly to a close-up of his mouth, his disfigured upper lip rolled back, tongue out through the teeth, one rolling eye still in frame. The mouth fills the screen, writhing lips pulled back from jagged teeth, and darkness in his mouth engulfs the lens. The difficulty of the next part was evident. A bouncing blur and a harsh movie light became a bed, and Charles Leeds thrashing. Mrs. Leeds sitting up, shielding her eyes, turning to Leeds and putting her hands on him, rolling toward the edge of the bed, legs tangled in the covers, trying to rise. The camera jerked toward the ceiling, molding whipping across the screen like a stave. Then the picture steadied. Mrs. Leeds back down on the mattress, a dark spot on her nightdress spreading, and Leeds hanging to his neck and eyes wild rising. The screen went black for 5 beats, then the tick of a splice. The camera was steady now, on a tripod. They were all dead now, arranged. 2 children seated against the wall facing the bed, one seated across the corner from them facing the camera. Mr. and Mrs. Leeds in bed with the covers over them. Mr. Leeds propped up against the headboard, the sheet covering the rope around his chest, and his head lolled to the side. Darla Hyde came into the picture from the left, where the stylized movements of a Balinese dancer. Blood smeared and naked except for his glasses and gloves, he mugged and capered among the dead. He approached the far side of the bed. Mrs. Leeds sighed, took the corner of the covers, whipped them off the bed, and held the pose as though he had executed a Veronica. Now, watching in the parlor of his grandparents' house, Darla Hyde was covered with a sheen of sweat. His thick tongue ran out constantly, the scar on his upper lip wet and shiny. He moaned as he stimulated himself. Even at the height of his pleasure, he was sorry to see that in the film's ensuing scene, he lost all grace and elegance of motion, rooting pig-like with his bottom turned carelessly to the camera. There was no dramatic pauses, no sense of pace or climax, just brutish frenzy. It was wonderful anyway. Watching the film was wonderful. Not as wonderful as the acts themselves. Two major flaws, Darla Hyde felt, were that the film did not actually show the deaths of the Leedses, and that his own performance was poor toward the end. He seemed to lose all his values. That was not how the Red Dragon would do it. Well, he had many films to make, and with experience, he hoped he could maintain some aesthetic distance, even in the most intimate moments. He must bear down. If this was his life's work, a magnificent thing, it would live forever. He must press on soon. He must select his fellow performers. Already he had copied several films of 4th of July family outings. The end of summer always brought a rush of business at the film processing plant as vacation movies came in. Thanksgiving would bring another rush. Families were mailing their applications to him every day. Chapter 10. The plane from Washington to Birmingham was half empty. Graham took a window seat with no one beside him. He declined the tired sandwich of stewardess offered and put his Jacoby file on the tray table. At the front he had listed the similarities between the Jacobys and the Leedses. Both couples were in their late 30s, both had children, 2 boys and a girl. Edward Jacoby was another son by a previous marriage, who was always away at college when his family was killed. Both parents in each case had college degrees, and both families lived in 2-story houses in pleasant suburbs. Mrs. Jacoby and Mrs. Leeds were attractive women. The families had some of the same credit cards, and they subscribed to some of the same popular magazines. There were similarities. That's where they ended. Charles Leeds was a tax attorney, while Edward Jacoby was an engineer and metallurgist. The Atlanta family were Presbyterian, the Jacobys were Catholic. The Leedses were lifelong Atlanta residents, while the Jacobys had lived in Birmingham only 3 months, transferred there from Detroit. The word random sounded in Graham's head like a dripping faucet. Random selection of victims, no apparent motive. Newspapers used those terms, and detectives spat them out in anger and frustration in homicide squad rooms. Random wasn't accurate, though. Graham knew that mass murderers and serial murderers do not select their victims at random. The man who killed the Jacobys and the Leedses saw something in them that drew him and drove him to do it. He might have known them well. Graham hoped so. Or he might not have known them at all. But Graham was sure the killer saw them at some time before he killed them. He chose them because something in them spoke to him, and the women were at the core of it. What was it? There were some differences in the crimes. Edward Jacoby was shot as he came down the stairs carrying a flashlight. Probably he was awakened by a noise. Mrs. Jacoby and her children were shot in the head. Mrs. Leeds in the abdomen. The weapon was a 9mm automatic pistol in all the shootings. Traces of steel wool from the homemade silencer were found in the wounds. The cartridge cases bore no fingerprints. The knife had been used only on Charles Leeds. Dr. Princey believed it was a thin-bladed and very keen possibility of filleting knife. The methods of entry were different too. A patio door pried open in Jacoby's, the glass cutter at the Leedses. Photographs of the crime in Birmingham did not show the quantity of blood found at the Leedses, but there were stains in the bedroom walls about 2 1/2 feet above the door, so the killer had an audience in Birmingham too. The Birmingham police checked the bodies for fingerprints, including fingernails, and found nothing. burial for a summer month in Birmingham would destroy any prints like the one on the Leeds child. In both places were the same blonde hairs, same spit, same semen. Graham propped photographs of the two smiling families against a seat back in front of him and stared at them for a long time in the hanging quiet of the airplane. What could have attracted the murderers specifically to them? Graham wanted very much to believe there was some common factor, and he would find it soon. Otherwise, he would have to enter more houses and see what the Tooth Fairy had left for him. Graham got directions from the Birmingham field office and checked in with the police by telephone from the airport. The compact car he rented spit water from the air conditioner vents onto his hands and arms. His first stop was the Guillen Realty office in Denison Avenue. Guillen, tall and blond, made haste across the turquoise shag to greet Graham. His smile faded when Graham showed him his identification and asked for the key to the Jacoby house. "Will there be some cops in uniform out there today?" he asked, his hand on the top of his head. "I don't know. I hope to God not. I got a case to show it twice this afternoon. It's a nice house. People see it and they forget it this other. Last Thursday I had a couple from Duluth, substantial retired people hot in the Sun Belt. I had them down the short rows talking mortgages. I mean, that man could have fronted a third. When the squad car rode up and then they came. A couple asked him questions and boy did they get some answers. These good officers gave him the whole tour, who was laying where, then it was goodbye again, much obliged for your trouble. I try to show them how safe we fixed it, and they don't listen. There they go, jake-legged through the gravel, climbing back in their sedan de ville. Have any single men asked to look at it? They haven't asked me. It's a multiple listing. I don't think so, though. People wouldn't let us start painting until, I don't know, we just got finished inside the Tuesday. Took 2 coats of interior latex, 3 in places. We're still working outside. It'll be a genuine showplace. How can you sell it before the estate's probated? I can't close till probate, but that doesn't mean I can't be ready. People could move in on a memorandum of understanding. I need to do something. A business associate of mine sold in the paper, and that interest just works all day and all night while you're asleep. Who's Mr. Jacoby's executor? Byron Metcalf, firm of Metcalf and Barnes. How long do you figure on being out there? I don't know, till I'm finished. You can drop that key in the mail. You don't have to come back by. Graham had the flat feeling of a cold trail as he drove out to the Jacoby house. It was barely within the city limits in an area newly annexed. He stopped beside the highway once to check his map before he found the turnoff onto an asphalt secondary road. More than a month had passed since they were killed. What had he been doing then? Putting a pair of diesels in a 65-foot robo-ship hull, signaling in Agaria and the crane to come down another half-inch. Molly came over the late afternoon, and he and Molly and Agaria sat under an awning in the cockpit of the half-finished boat and ate big prawns Molly brought and drank cold Dos-Equis beer. Agriaga explained the best way to clean crayfish, drawing the tail fin and sawdust on the deck. The sunlight, broken on the water, played on the undersides of the wheeling gulls. Water from the air conditioner spurted the front of Graham's shirt, and he was in Birmingham now, and there were no prawns or gulls. He was driving in pastures, and wooded lots were on his right with goats and horses in them. On his left was Stonebridge, a long-established residential area with a few elegant homes and a number of rich people's houses. He saw the realtor's sign 100 yards before he reached it. The Jacoby house was the only one on the right side of the road. Sap from the pecan trees beside the drive had made the gravel sticky and rattled inside the fenders of the car. A carpenter on a ladder was installing window guards. The workman raised a hand to Graham as he walked around the house. A flagged patio at the side was shaded by a large oak tree. At night, the tree would block out the floodlight on the side yard as well. This was where the Tooth Fairy had entered, through sliding glass doors. The doors had been replaced with new ones, the aluminum frames still bright and bearing the manufacturer's sticker. Covering the sliding doors was a new wrought iron security gate. The basement door was new too, flush steel and secured by deadbolts. The components of a hot tub stood in crates on the flagstones. Graham went inside, bare floors and dead air. His footsteps echoed in the empty house. The new mirrors in the bathrooms had never reflected the Jacoby's faces or the killers. On each was a fuzzy white spot where the price had been torn off. A folded drop cloth lay in a corner of the master bedroom. Graham sat on it enough for the sunlight to come bare in the windows, to move one board width across the floor. There was nothing here, nothing anymore. If he had come here immediately after the Jacobys were killed, would the Leetzes still be alive? Graham wondered. He tested the weight of that burden. It did not lift when he was out of the house and under the sky again. Graham stood in the shade of a pecan tree, shoulders hunched, hands in his pockets, and looked down at the long drive of the road that passed in front of the Jacoby house. How had the Tooth Fairy come to the Jacoby house? He had to drive. Where did he park? The gravel driveway was too noisy for the midnight visit, Graham thought. The Birmingham police did not agree. He walked down the drive to the roadside. The asphalt road was bordered with ditches as far as he could see. It might be possible to pull across the ditch and hide a vehicle in the brush on the Jacoby side of the road if the ground were hard and dry. Facing the Jacoby house across the road was the single entrance to Stonebridge. A sign that said Stonebridge had a private patrol service. A strange vehicle would be noticed there, so would a man working late at night. Scratch parking in Stonebridge. Graham went back into the house and was surprised to find the telephone working. He called the Weather Bureau and learned that 3 inches of rain fell on the day before the Jacobys were killed. The ditches were full then. The Tooth Fairy did not hide his vehicle beside the asphalt road. A horse in a pasture beside the yard kept pace with Graham as he walked the whitewashed fence toward the rear of the property. He gave the horse a lifesaver and gave him at the corner as he turned along the back fence behind the outbuildings. He stopped when he saw the depression on the ground where the Jacoby children had buried their cat. Thinking about it in the Atlanta police station with Springfield, he had pictured the outbuildings as white. Actually, they were dark green. The children had wrapped the cat in a dish towel and buried it in a shoebox with a flower between its paws. Graham rested his forearm on top of the fence and leaned his forehead against it. A pet funeral, solemn rite of childhood. Parents going back into the house, ashamed to pray. The children looking at one another, discovering new nerves in the place. Lost purses. One bows her head, they all do. The shovel taller than any of them. Afterwards, a discussion of whether or not the cat is in heaven with God and Jesus, and the children don't shout for a while. A certainty came to Graham as he stood, sun hot on the back of his neck. As surely as the Tooth Fairy killed the cat, he had watched the children bury it. He had to see that if he possibly could. He did not make 2 trips out here, one to kill the cat and the second to the Jacobys. He came and killed the cat and waited for the children to find it. There was no way to determine exactly where the children found the cat. The police had located no one who spoke to the Jacobys after noon, 10 hours or so before they died. Now had the Tooth Fairy come, and where had he waited? Behind the back fence, the brush began, running head high for 30 yards to the trees. Graham dug his wrinkled map out of his back pocket and spread it on the fence. It showed an unbroken strip of woods a quarter-mile deep running across the back of the Jacoby property and continuing in both directions. Beyond the woods, bounding them on the south, was a section-line road that paralleled the one in front of the Jacoby house. Graham drove from the house back to the highway and measuring the distance on his odometer. He went south on the highway and turned onto the section-line road he had seen on the map. Measuring again, he drove slowly along it until the odometer showed him he was behind the Jacoby house on the other side of the woods. Here the pavement ended at a low-income housing project, so it did not show on his map. He pulled into the parking lot. Most of the cars were old and sagging on their springs. 2 were up on blocks. Black children played basketball in the bare earth around the single nestless goal. Graham sat on his fender to watch the game for a moment. He wanted to take off his jacket, but he knew the .44 Special and the flat camera on his belt would attract attention. He always felt curious embarrassment when people looked at his pistol. There were 8 players on the team wearing shirts. The Skins had 11, all playing at once, refereeing by acclamation. A small Skin, shoved down in the rebounding, stalked home mad. He came back, fortified with a cookie, and dived into the pack again. The yelling and the thump of the ball lifted Graham's spirits. 1 goal, 1 basketball. It struck him again how many things the Leetzes had. The Jacobys too, according to the Birmingham police, when they ruled out burglary. Boats and sporting equipment, camping equipment, cameras and guns and rods. It was another thing the families had in common. And with the thoughts of the Leedses and Jacobys alive came a thought of how they were afterward, and Graham couldn't watch basketball anymore. He took a deep breath and headed for the dark woods across the road. The underbrush, heavy at the edge of the pine woods, thinned when Graham reached the deep shade, and he had easy going over the pine needles. The air was warm and still. Blue jays in the trees ahead announced his coming. The ground sloped gently to a dry stream bed, where a few cypresses grew and tracks of raccoons and field mice were pressed into the red clay. A number of human footprints marked the stream bed, some of them left by children. All were caved in and rounded, left several rains ago. Past the stream bed, the land rose again, changing to sandy loam that supported ferns beneath the pines. Graham worked his way uphill in the heat till he saw the light beneath the trees at the edge of the woods. Between the trunks he could see the upper story of the Jacoby house. Undergrowth again, head high from the edge of the woods to the Jacoby's back fence. Graham worked his way through it and stood at the fence looking into the yard. The Tooth Fairy could have parked at the housing development and come through the woods to the brush behind the house. He could have lured the cat to the brush and choked it, the body limp in one hand as he crawled on his knees and other hand to the fence. Graham could see the cat in the air, never twisting to land on its feet, but hitting on its back with a thump in the yard. The Tooth Fairy did that in daylight. The children would not have found or buried the cat at night. And he waited to see them find it. Did he wait for the rest of the day in the heat of the underbrush? At the fence he would be visible through the rails. In order to see the yard from further back in the brush, he would have to stand and face the windows of the house with the sun beating on him. Clearly, he would go back to the trees. So did Graham. The Birmingham police were not stupid. He could see they had pushed through the brush, searching an area as a matter of course, but that was before the cat was found. They were looking for clues, dropped objects, tracks, not for a vantage point. He went a few yards into the forest behind the Jacoby house and worked back and forth on the dappled shade. First, he took the high ground that afforded a partial view of the yard, then worked his way down the tree line. He had searched for more than an hour when a wink of light from the ground caught his eye. He lost it, found it again. It was a ring-pulled tab from a soft drink, half buried in the leaves beneath an elm tree, one of the few elms among the pines. He spotted it from 8 feet away and went no closer for 5 minutes while he scanned the ground around the tree. He squatted and brushed the leaves away ahead of him as he approached the tree, duck-walking in the path he made to avoid ruining any impressions. Working slowly, he cleared the leaves around the trunk. No footprints had pressed through the mat of last year's leaves. Near the aluminum tab, he found a dried apple core, eaten thin by ants. Birds had pecked out the seeds. He studied the ground for 10 more minutes. Finally, he sat on the ground, stretching out his aching legs, and leaned back against the tree. A cone of gnats swarmed the column of sunlight. A caterpillar rippled along the underside of a leaf. There was a wedge of Red Creek mud from the inside of a boot on the limb above his head. Graham hung his coat on a branch and began to climb carefully on the opposite side of the tree, peering around the trunk at the limbs above the wedge of mud. At 30 feet, he looked around the trunk. There was the Jacoby house 175 yards away. It looked different from this height. The roof colored dominant. He could see the backyard and the ground behind the outbuildings very well. A decent pair of field glasses would pick up the expression on a face easily at this distance. Graham could hear traffic in the distance. As far away, he heard a beagle in a chase. A cicada started its numbing bandsaw buzz and drowned out the other sounds. A thick limb just above him joined the trunk at a right angle to the Jacoby house. He pulled himself up until he could see and leaned around the trunk to look at it. Close by his cheek, a soft drink can was wedged beneath the limb in the trunk. "I love it," Graham whispered into the bark. "Oh, sweet Jesus, yes, come on, can." Still, a child might have left it. He climbed higher on the side of the tree, dicey work on small branches, and moved around until he could look down on the big limb. A patch of outer bark on the upper side of the limb was shaved away, leaving a field of green inner bark at the size of a playing card. Centered on the green rectangle carved through the white wood, Graham saw a symbol. It was done carefully and cleanly with a very sharp knife. It was not the work of a child. Graham photographed the mark, carefully bracketing his exposures. The view from the big limb was good and had been improved. The stub of a small branch jutted down from the limb above, had been clipped off to clear the view. The fibers were compressed and the ends slightly flattened in the cutting. Graham had looked for the severed branch. If it had been on the ground, he would have seen it. There, tangled in the limbs below, brown withered leaves amid the green foliage. The laboratory would need both sides of the cut in order to measure the pinch of the cutting edges. Had meant coming back here with a saw. He made several photographs of the stub. All the while he murmured to himself, "I think that after you killed the cat, you threw it into the yard. My man, you climbed up here and waited. I think you watched the children pass the time whittling and dreaming. When night came, you saw them passing their bright windows, and you watched the shades go down, and you saw the lights go out one by one. After a while, you climbed down and went in them, didn't you? It wouldn't be too hard to climb straight down from the big limb with a flashlight and the bright moon rising." It was hard enough to climb for Graham. He stuck a twig into the opening of the soft drink can, gently lifted it from the crotch of the tree, and descended, holding the twig in his teeth when he had to use both hands. Back at the housing project, Graham found that someone had written "Levon is a doo-doo head" in the dust on the side of his car. The height of the writing indicated even the youngest residents were well along in literacy. He wondered if they had written on the Tooth Fairy's car. Graham sat for a few minutes looking at the rows of windows. There appeared to be about 100 units. It was possible that someone might remember a white stranger in the parking lot late at night. Even though a moon had passed, it was well worth trying. To ask every resident and get it done quickly, you need the help of Birmingham police. He fought the temptation to send the drink can straight into Jimmy Price in Washington. He had to ask the Birmingham police for manpower. It would be better to give him what they had. Dusting the can would be a straightforward job. Trying for fingerprints etched by acid sweat was another matter. Price could do it after Birmingham dusted, as long as the can wasn't handled by bare fingers. Better give it to the police. He knew the FBI documents section would fall in the carving like a rabid mongoose. Pictures of that for everybody. Nothing lost here. He called Birmingham Homicide from the Jacoby house. The detectives arrived just as the realtor, Guillen, was ushering his prospective buyers. Chapter 11. Eileen was reading the National Tattler article called "Filth in Your Bread" when Dollarhide came into the cafeteria. She had eaten only the filling in her tuna salad sandwich. Behind the red goggles, Dollarhide's eyes zigged down the front page of the Tattler. Cover lines, in addition to "Filth in Your Bread," included Elvis at Secret Love Retreat, exclusive pics, stunning breakthrough for cancer victims, and the big banner line, "Hannibal the Cannibal helps lawmen, cops consult fiend in Tooth Fairy murders." He stood at the window absently stirring his coffee until he heard Eileen get up. She dumped her tray in the trash container and was about to throw the Tattler when Dollarhide touched her shoulder. "May I have that paper, Eileen?" "Sure, Mr. D. I'll just get it for the horoscopes." Dollarhide read it in his office with the door closed. Freddie Lowndes had his two bylines in the same double-page center spread. The main story was a breathless reconstruction of the Jacoby and Leeds murders. Since the police had not divulged many of the specifics, Lowndes consulted his imagination for lurid details. Dollarhide found them banal. The sidebar was more interesting. Insane fiend consulted in mass murders by cop he tried to kill, by Freddie Lowndes. Baltimore PD federal manhunters, stymied in their search for the Tooth Fairy, psychopathic slayer of entire families in Birmingham and Atlanta, have turned to the most savage killer in captivity for help, Dr. Hannibal Lecter, whose unspeakable practices were reported in these pages 3 years ago, was consulted this week in his maximum security asylum cell by ace investigator Will Graham. Graham suffered a near-fatal slashing at Lecter's hands when he unmasked the mass murderer. He was brought back from early retirement to spearhead the hunt for the Tooth Fairy. What went on this bizarre meeting of two mortal enemies? What was Graham after? "It takes one to catch one," a high federal official told this reporter. He was referring to Lecter, known as Hannibal the Cannibal, who is both a psychiatrist and a mass murderer. Or was he referring to Graham? The Tattler has learned that Graham, former instructor in forensics at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, was once confined to a mental institution for a period of 4 weeks. Federal officials refused to say why they placed a man with a history of mental instability at the forefront of a desperate manhunt. The nature of Graham's mental problem was not revealed, but one former psychiatric worker called it deep depression. Garmin Evans, a paraprofessional formerly employed at Bethesda Naval Hospital, said Graham was admitted to the psychiatric wing soon after he killed Garrett Jacob Hobbs, the Minnesota Shrike. Graham shot Hobbs to death in 1975, ending Hobbs' 8-month reign of terror in Minneapolis. Evans said Graham was withdrawn and refused to eat or speak during the first weeks of his stay. Graham has never been an FBI agent. Veteran observers attribute this to the Bureau's strict screening procedures designed to detect instability. Federal sources would reveal only that Graham originally worked in the FBI crime laboratory and was assigned to teaching duties at the FBI Academy after outstanding work both in the laboratory and in the field, where he served as a special investigator. The Tattler learned that before his federal service, Graham was in the homicide division of the New Orleans Police Department, a post he left to attend graduate school in forensics at George Washington University. One New Orleans officer who served with Graham commented, "Well, you can call him retired, but the feds like to know he's around. It's like having a king snake under the house. You might not see him much, but it's nice to know he's there to eat the moccasins." Dr. Lecter is confined for the rest of his life. If he is ever declared sane, he will have to stand trial on 9 counts of first-degree murder. Lecter's attorney says that the mass murderer spends his time writing useful articles for the scientific journals and has an ongoing dialogue by mail with some of the most respected figures in psychiatry. Dollarhide stopped reading and looked at the pictures. There were 2 of them above the sidebar. One showed Lecter pinned against the side of a state trooper's car. The other was a picture of Will Graham taken by Freddie Lowndes outside the Baltimore State Hospital. A small photograph of Lowndes ran beside each of his bylines. Dollarhide looked at the pictures for a long time. He ran the tip of his forefinger over them slowly, back and forth, his touch exquisitely sensitive to the rough newsprint. Ink left a smudge on his fingertips. He wet the smudge with his tongue and wiped it off with a Kleenex. Then he cut out the sidebar and put it in his pocket. On his way home from the plant, Dollarhide bought toilet paper of the quick dissolving kind used in boats and campers, and a nasal inhaler. He felt good, despite his hay fever, like many people who have undergone extensive rhinoplasty. Dollarhide had no hair on his nose, and hay fever plagued him. So did upper respiratory infections. When a stalled truck held him up for 10 minutes on the Missouri River Bridge to St. Charles, he sat patiently. His black van was carpeted, cool and quiet. Handel's water music played on the stereo. He rippled his fingers on the steering wheel in time with the music and dabbed at his nose. 2 women in a convertible were in the lane beside him. They wore shorts and blouses tied across the midriff. Dollarhide looked down into the convertible from his van. They seemed tired and bored, squinting into the lowering sun. The woman on the passenger side had her head against the seat back and her feet on the dash. Her slumped posture made 2 creases across her bare stomach. Dollarhide could see a suck mark on the inside of her thigh. She caught him looking, sat up and crossed her legs. He saw weary distaste in her face. She said something to the woman at the wheel. Both looked straight ahead. He knew they were talking about him. He was so glad it did not make him angry. Few things made him angry anymore. He knew that he was developing a becoming dignity. The music was very pleasant. The traffic in front of Dollarhide began to move. The lanes beside him were still stalled. He looked forward to getting home. He tapped the wheel in time with the music and rolled down the window with his other hand. He hawked and spit a blob of green phlegm into the lap of the woman beside him, hitting her just beside the navel. Her curses sounded high and thin over the handle as he drove away. Dollarhide's great ledger was at least 100 years old, bound in black leather with brass corners. It was so heavy, a sturdy machine table supported it in the locked closet at the top of the stairs. From the moment he saw it at the bankruptcy sale at the old St. Louis Printing Company, Dollarhide knew it should be his. Now, bathed in his kimono, he unlocked the closet and rolled it out. When the book was centered beneath the painting of the Great Red Dragon, he settled himself in a chair and opened it. The smell of foxed paper rose to his face. Across the first page in large letters, He had illuminated himself were the words from Revelation, and there came a red dragon also. The first item in the book was the only one not neatly mounted. Loose between the pages was a yellowed photograph of Dollarhide as a small child with his grandmother on the steps of the big house. He is holding onto his grandmother's skirt. Her arms are folded and her back is straight. Dollarhide turned past it. He ignored it as though it had been left there by mistake. There were many clippings in the ledger, the earliest ones about the disappearances of elderly women in St. Louis and Toledo. Pages between the clippings were covered with Dollarhide's handwriting, black ink on a fine copper plate, script not unlike William Blake's own handwriting. Fastened in the margin, ragged bits of scalp trailed their hands of hair like comets pressed in God's scrapbook. The Jacoby clippings from Birmingham were there, along with film cartridges and slides set in pockets glued to the pages. So were the stories on the leads, with the film beside them. The term Tooth Fairy had not appeared in the press unlike Atlanta. The name was marked out in all the leads' stories. Now Dollarhide did the same with his Tattler clipping, obliterating Tooth Fairy with angry slashes of a red marker pen. He turned to a new blank page in his ledger and trimmed the Tattler clipping to fit, should Graham's picture go in. The words criminally insane carved in the stone above Graham offended Dollarhide. He hated the sight of any place of confinement. Graham's face was close to him. He set it aside for the time being. But Lecter. This was not a good picture of the doctor. Dollarhide had a better one, which he fetched from a box in his closet. It was published upon Lecter's committal and showed the fine eyes. Still, it was not satisfactory. In Dollarhide's mind, Lecter's likeness should be the dark portrait of a Renaissance prince, for Lecter, alone among all men, might have the sensitivity and experience to understand the glory, the majesty of Dollarhide's becoming. Dollarhide felt that Lecter knew the unreality of the people who died to help you in these things, understood that they are not flesh, but light and air and color and quick sounds quickly ended when you change them, like balloons of color bursting, that they are more important for the changing, more important than the lives they scramble after, pleading. Dollarhide bore screams as a sculptor bears dust from the beaten stone. Lecter was capable of understanding that blood and breath were only elements undergoing change to feel its radiance just as soon as the source of light is burning. He would like to meet Lecter, talk and share with him, rejoice with him in their shared vision, and be recognized by him as John the Baptist recognized the one who came after, sit on him as the dragon sat on 666 in Blake's Revelation series, and film his death as, dying, he melted with the strength of the dragon. Dollarhide pulled on a new pair of rubber gloves and went to his desk. He unrolled and discarded the outer roll of toilet paper he had bought. Then he unrolled a strip of 7 sheets and tore it off. Printing carefully on the tissue with his left hand, he wrote a letter to Lecter. Speech is never a reliable indicator of how a person writes. You never know. Dollarhide's speech was bent and pruned by disabilities real and imagined, and the difference between his speech and his writing was startling. Still, he found he could not say the most important things he felt. He wanted to hear from Lecter. He needed a personal response before he could tell Dr. Lecter the important things. How could he manage that? He rummaged through his box of Lecter clippings, read them all again. Finally, a simple way occurred to him as he wrote again. The letter seemed too difficult and defendant and shy when he read it over. He had signed it Avid Fan. He brooded over the signature for several minutes. Avid Fan indeed. His chin rose in an imperious fraction. He put his gloved thumb in his mouth, removed his dentures, and placed them on the blotter. The upper plate was unusual. The teeth were normal, straight and white, but the pink acrylic upper part was a tortuous shape cast to fit the twists and fissures of his gums. Attached to the plate was a soft plastic prosthesis with an obrachator thumb, which helped him close off his soft palate in speech. He took a small case from his desk. It held another set of teeth. The upper casting was the same, but there was no prosthesis. The crooked teeth had dark stains between them and gave off a faint stench. They were identical to his grandmother's teeth in the bedside glass downstairs. Dollarhide's nostrils flared at the odor. He opened his sunken smile and put them in place and wet them with his tongue. He folded the letter across the signature and bit down hard on it. When he opened the letter again, the signature was enclosed in an oval bite mark, his notary seal, an imprinteur flecked with old blood. Thank you. That was part 4 of Red Dragon. Thank you for listening, and good night.